Can you turn your big weakness into a strength? Our guest today emphatically says yes. You've got to hear Chad's story going from victim to visionary. Episode 200 features Chad E. Foster, Red Hat executive, author of Blind Ambition, and motivational speaker.
More things went my way than did not. And you know what? The most important thing of all, I know that I reached my full potential. I know that I lived my best life. It may not have been a perfect life. None of us are going to have that, but it was my best life. I know where my boundaries are because I pushed and I pushed and I found those boundaries, and that's great. If you're not failing from time to time, then you're not aiming high.
This episode is all about overcoming adversity. Faced with adversity, we can grow. Our guest knows this firsthand. Chad went blind in his early 20s. When most people were preparing for the adventure of adult life, Chad saw the world that he grew up with fade to black. But that didn't stop him from becoming the first blind person to graduate from the Harvard Business School leadership program and climbing the corporate ladder as a successful finance sales executive. As a speaker, Chad inspires people to overcome their own blind spots. In this episode, you'll learn the power of the stories we tell ourselves can turn our adversities into advantages, dealing with doubters and what other people think, and living regret-free so you can reach your potential and live your best life. Now let's get inspired with Chad E. Foster. Chad, welcome to Inspired Money. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Let's jump right in. What's your earliest childhood memory of money?
I think my earliest childhood memory of money was having things organized at home. I had a really organized room, and I had a piggy bank on my dresser, and I was always extremely judicious with funds. For whatever reason, I was always a saver. I was always somebody who paid attention to how much money I had and what I wanted to get, and how could I use the money that I could save and accumulate to get what I wanted. And I don't know if everybody's wired that way from the get-go, but I certainly was. And it's ironic that I ended up getting a job later working with money and helping people, helping businesses make more money. But I think those seeds were sown at a very early age for me.
You think you were just born that way? What were other people in your household? What was their kind of approach to money? Different or same?
Very different. My brother and I were pretty much the opposites. So if he had money, he would spend it on whatever. And it was one of those things. He was very much in the now, and I was very much thinking about the future. So if you blended us together, you might have a perfect kind of, work-life balance person, but we were on opposite ends of the spectrum. So it was kind of interesting.
That is interesting how that plays out. So I really enjoyed your book, Blind Ambition. And I noticed that you got your diagnosis of retinitis pigmentosa at age 3. That's very early. I think 3-year-olds, I don't know how much you understand. You're also really big. Well, you say that the single most important thing people can learn is to tell themselves the right stories. Knowing that you could go blind at any time, what was the evolving story that you told yourself as a kid?
As a kid, you really don't know what you're going through. So it was an idea. And when I was 3, nobody told me what was going on. As I got older, I started to realize that there were limitations to my eyesight. When I would have accidents in dark conditions or at night, or my peripheral vision didn't pick something up. And so the stories at that point where I'm going through something and not all of my friends were, I didn't have the best narrative in my mind, and it was hard to deal with. And as things continue to evolve, when I was 14 years old, I met with a top retinal specialist, and he remarked how he wasn't entirely sure that I had RP. It was possible I had something less severe than RP because of the things that I was doing. I was playing basketball, I was riding jet skis and motorcycles and learning how to drive a car and playing basketball and football, soccer, baseball. I was wrestling in high school. I was a very active kid. And because I was so active, it was possible he thought that I was misdiagnosed because keep in mind, I was diagnosed in 1979, 1980. We didn't have the ability to identify genetic markers at that point. So it was all based on what they thought. It was at Duke University Medical Center, which is obviously a very good medical institution back in the 1970s, 1980s. So they, even though they didn't have the same technology that we have today, they were a very good institution, and it turns out they were right. But in the meantime, my story evolved as I learned that maybe I don't have RP. I started to develop, as many of us do when we're children, as when we're young adults, this sense of invincibility. Maybe I'll be an outlier. Maybe it won't happen to me. Maybe I can beat this thing. Maybe I won't go blind until later in life, and I'll have lived most of my life, and boom, problem solved. So I lived with this idea of invincibility for a while until in college I did lose my eyesight, and then it hit me. Darkness came knocking on my door, and that was a really difficult time for me. And then my story had to evolve from there. I had to figure out, what was I going to be when I grew up? Because we ask kids all the time, what you want to be when you grow up, and none of them say they want to be a blind person, right? So I had to figure out what I was going to do. My self-identity was called into question. Everything I knew and believed about myself really was no more. At least so I thought at the time. At that time, I'd seen myself as a hard-charging young man ready to make a difference in the world, and it's hard to see yourself as hard-charging when you're not even able to walk. And I wanted to help other people, but I wasn't even sure at that time whether or not I could help myself. So self-identity was a crisis moment in college, and as you've read in the book, I ended up making it through that. My story continued to evolve, but I'll pause for a second and get you to give you an opportunity to react to some of that.
Sure. I'm thinking that it was almost a more difficult transition because you were so active. Like, it seems that your self-identity was really tied to things that require sight. You were such an active boy playing sports, and it sounds like you had a really strong ability to compensate and adapt. I mean, you were still having accidents, so your vision was impaired, but you were able to still play basketball, play football, and, occasionally you run into something, but most people wouldn't know that you were, sight impaired. How did it feel when you lost your sight? And I'm curious about, some of the self-defeating behaviors and negative thinking that came along with that.
It was a really difficult period because I felt this sense of, I guess before then, I always saw myself as an active, athletic, strong, and in many ways tough, because of the mental toughness I needed to persist, and then the physical toughness I needed to endure the pain of the accidents that I've had, because I had a lot of accidents. I didn't list even a third of them in the book, right? If I'd listed all of them, people would go, "My God, this guy needs to get some help." But the amount of things that I endured getting hurt, and then the mental discipline to drag yourself through a workout. I've been working out since I was 14, and whether you're training in the gym or training on the basketball court or on the soccer field or whatever, it takes mental toughness to push yourself through it. A lot of people think it's all physical talent. That's part of the equation, but to be really good and committed to anything, it takes a lot of mental discipline. And so I had a lot of mental discipline as well that was a byproduct of the things that I was doing athletically, which helped me as I started to go through this very painful period, this emotionally painful period of going blind. That was a difficult time, because you start to think about what you thought you were going to be and the hopes and dreams and aspirations that you had for yourself as you're growing up, and you start to look into your future and you realize all those things, many of them are not possible anymore. And in college, I just had to start to let go and reimagine what my life was going to be like. And so that was a very difficult time for me as I started to mourn the death of my imagined future self. And I didn't cope with it in the most productive ways. You know, I spent time trying to salve the pain, whether it's having fun with my friends, or in some ways I was a little more productive in going to the gym and just taking out all of my anger and frustration out at the gym, which was good. It helped me, you know, to stay in shape at least, and I would have some pretty brutal workouts, but I needed to find an outlet for it, and until I learned how to think in a more productive way and to tell myself the right stories and really learn how to bounce back better than before. And thankfully, I was able to do that.
When you look back at that time, do you see that as pretty dark days?
Yeah, I do. I think because for a year or two, I had a very sad attitude, if I'm being honest, pathetic attitude. You know, I played the victim. I was, woe is me, and I'm just the opposite of that now. I'm the opposite of the woe is me. I'm actually happier now, and I'm more successful now than when I can see. I know now that I'm a better person because of my blindness and not in spite of it. But if you'd told me that then, I would not have been able to hear you. And I had this inflection point moment, this tipping point moment when I went to Leader Dogs for the Blind that really changed my perspective on life. It was such a groundbreaking moment for me that after I had that experience, no longer could I look at my situation with that victim mentality. And I think a lot of us go through life with a victim's mentality. And until we have some groundbreaking moment like that, it's easier to play a victim than it is to step back and own our lives. And the cold reality is none of us are responsible for our circumstances in life, but we all have to be accountable for our life and its outcomes. It's my life. I have to own it. It's your life. You have to own it. If you don't, who will? Nobody. And so you can sit around and find a bunch of legitimate reasons as to why you don't get what you want out of life. Who's going to end up losing if you do? If you find legitimate reasons to fail at what you want to get out of life, the only person who loses from that is you. So is it better to comfort ourselves in the moment or to find the courage and inner strength to summon the determination we need to push through whatever life presents us? Because it is our life. We only get one of them, as far as I know, so we may as well make the best of it.
Chad, tell us about that inflection point, because I think it's cool that you went to Leader Dogs to get set up with your first guide dog. And that's going to be like a huge step in enabling you to be more independent as an adult and to set off on a career. But your experience there, I think you really learned gratitude. So tell us how that gratitude and that experience changed your mindset.
Spot on. So I went there to learn how to use a guide dog. I ended up learning a far more profound lesson, and it started with the people I'd met there. Some of them, they had mental impairments and they were also blind. Some of them were on dialysis because they had diabetes that had stolen their eyesight. And there were these young girls there who were deaf and blind, and they were getting a guide dog to travel independently. And for these girls, we had to talk with an interpreter who would then sign into their hands, and that was the only way that they could communicate, but they were still getting a guide dog to travel independently. And it's one thing when you meet someone on the street and you hear how rough they have it, but when you live with someone and you see those challenges firsthand for an entire month, it really etches it into your memory. And so for me, that was my tipping point moment to where I learned that happiness is not a feeling and it's not an emotion. It's a decision that you either choose to make or don't every single day when you wake up. None of us control the circumstances in our lives, but we all control how we show up and how we choose to receive them and how we can learn to have gratitude for the things that we do have. And as it turns out, the stories we tell ourselves is the most important thing, but it's linked to, and the foundation of that perspective and the stories we tell ourselves is gratitude. If you don't have gratitude for the things that you do have, then you're not going very far in life. So after I saw the tremendous living courage exhibited by these courageous people, I just felt pathetic having anything close to a victim's mindset. I couldn't look at my life in the same way. I was given 23 years of eyesight, all of my hearing and kidney function, and Yeah, I made some questionable decisions in my youth, but I had all of my cognitive faculties. So this epiphany shifted the tectonic plates I had stood on for so many years. Being exposed to those courageous people taught me life's most valuable lesson. And that really does get back to being able to be thankful and grateful for the things that you do have. And I know it's cliche. We all say that, if you look around, you'll find people who have it worse off than you. But when you live with someone for a month, it's not the same as meeting them and then letting them go. When you see those challenges firsthand, it really does sear it into your memory.
Wow, it is I think it's powerful to hear how big an impact perspective can have, and that oftentimes our destiny or how we view things or the story that you talk about that we tell ourselves, how that has how it can have such a big difference in our lives. And sometimes we're our own biggest enemy, maybe.
It's everything. Our perspective, life is all about our perspective. The stories we tell ourselves can keep us trapped or help us bounce back. Will you have the mindset of a victim or the mindset of a visionary? How do you see yourself? What's your self-image? And that will determine how you show up everywhere you go. If you see yourself as poor me, then that's who you're going to be. If you see yourself as, I've got this, I'm going to own this situation, I'm going to own my blindness, and I'm going to make it look good, then that's who you can be. But if you don't show up and own your situation and don't take accountability for it and don't learn how to be more intentional about telling yourself the right stories, your odds aren't very good. You're relying on circumstance and chance, which is not, hope's not a strategy, right? Hope's not a plan. You've got to be intentional. And I'm not saying every day is easy. It's not. I'm not here to pitch some false hope here that it's all easy and roses and blah, 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 blah. That's not how I roll, man. Life can be hard, right? Life's hard. But guess what? We have the privilege of being humans. And as humans, we can step back and we can be a little more intentional, a little more conscious about the narrative we want to have in our minds. We still have the bad thoughts that come up every now and then and challenge the better narrative, but we should be able to step back and take control of that a little bit. And it could start with journaling. It could start with just being more conscious about the stories that we have playing in our minds. But if you don't get control of the stories playing in your minds and your self-image, your self-identity cannot evolve, and you cannot become who you're destined to be. And isn't that the scariest thing of all, is going to our graves with unmet potential, knowing that we could have been who we dreamt of being, but just didn't have the courage, the conviction, or the confidence to follow through.
Chad, it's a lot to go through. On one hand, you're still mourning like you're grieving the death of the future self that you had in your mind. Yep. You're now getting paired with a guide dog. You saw these girls who were both deaf and blind, and it gave you perspective. What did the process look like, transitioning from victim to visionary? Is it very small steps?
Yeah, I think it for me it started with gratitude, and the gratitude started to reshape the way that I showed up. My demeanor was very different. My attitude was very different. I went back to college. I had this profoundly different outlook on life. So I will say that for me, my attitude did a complete 180-degree turn based on the gratitude that I had. And when I did that, people around me started to treat me differently. They saw that my attitude was phenomenal. My effort was off the charts. And so doors started to open for me. At university, I came back from Leader Dogs for the Blind with the dog to be able to get around. But most importantly, this new outlook on life, ended up having to relearn how to learn. Went from being a pre-med major to a business major. And it turns out I was a better blind student than sighted student. I made straight A's in the dean's list for the first time and ended up getting a job at a top consulting company. And I think in large part because, number one, my attitude was different, but then my effort was off the charts because my attitude was different, right? My attitude affected my effort, and it affected people around me. And I didn't really, at this point, have the clarity that I have today as to what got me over the hump. But it really did start with, it was the gratitude linking to my attitude, to the stories that I began telling myself about my situation. And that started really opening up doors for me. And so it made it easier for me to get what I wanted out of life when I had the right attitude adjustment. So that piece of it was profound. The other pieces of it, of moving mindset from victim to visionary, is a little slower process, but really taking a closer look at how can we reframe our struggles into strengths? How can I make blind look good? What advantage does this disadvantage of blindness offer me? I talk about it too. Blindness was the incredible gift, this beautiful gift that came disguised in some really ugly wrapping paper. And I think a lot of your listeners, they have gifts in their lives that are right in front of them, disguised in some ugly wrapping paper. But they have to open their minds and their hearts to receive it and figure out how they can take a situation that they can't control. I couldn't control whether or not I went blind, but I could control how I showed up with that situation. I could turn that struggle into a strength, and I found that out later in my life. But it's being able to think differently about the stories we tell ourselves. It's the meaning we attach to events. Did I go blind because, number one, Chad has really bad luck? Or number two, I went blind because I'm one of the few people on the planet with the strength and the toughness to overcome it and use it as a tool to help others. Now, technically, both of those stories could be correct. One of those stories, the first one, frames me up as a victim. The second one frames up my disability, my blindness, as a strength. It says that I went blind because I'm one of the few people strong enough to overcome that and use it to help others. All of a sudden, I've taken blindness and I've reframed it into a strength, to where any curveball that life throws at me, I now have the inner belief that I can overcome it, I can deal with it, and I can make it look good because I've gone blind. And that's the beauty in the stories we tell ourselves. The technical term is called cognitive reframing, but essentially what that is making sure that we control the marketing in our minds. But once we control the marketing in our minds, it's no longer marketing. It's your story, and you're the narrator of your own story, so you get to choose your own ending. So why not make it a positive ending in your life? Because at the end of our lives, we'll all become those stories.
So you said that you were a better student as a blind person. You also said that this gift, and I like that you put it in those terms, the gift of blindness made you a better person. It made you a more successful executive. You wrote that you're a visionary because you cannot see. How is it that blindness has brought you more happiness? How are you a happier person today than you were when you had sight?
Well, it starts with gratitude, but I think a lot of what people mistake when they think about visionary and vision, eyesight allows us to see things all around us, but being a visionary is about looking inside us. And so you can have better eyesight than me, but that doesn't mean that you have better vision than me. My eyesight is not that great, but my vision has never been better. I like to think of it as it's my mind sight, being able to see inside of me and what truly is meaningful to me and what I really want out of life. I think my blindness has made me more contemplative than before, more reflective, and more able to recognize that life is not all about being easy. Who wants a super easy life? If we had the easiest life in the world, how fulfilling would that be? If everything was just handed to us our entire lives, do we get the most fulfillment and enjoyment from the things that are handed to us, or the things that we earn, the things that we work for? The biggest adversity in our lives present us the most opportunity for growth. And when we grow, we feel fulfilled. We feel happier. We feel more successful, more accomplished. And so I've learned that life begins outside of our comfort zone. And if you're never facing any adversity in your life, then you're probably not growing enough. And that, to me, is where life begins, and that's growth through adversity.
Well, I tell everybody that if I were able to hit the golf ball far and straight every time, golf would be boring, which is why I'm walking all through the woods and going all over the place.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm getting my money's worth, per shot.
Yeah, you don't want to go out and shoot 18 holes in an hour and a half, right?
That's very boring. Yeah. There's no fun in that kind of ease.
No, absolutely not.
Well, I'm really impressed, Chad, because it seems like you not only reframed your thinking, but you truly used your blindness as a strength, because I read about how you would sit in a conference room at work and suddenly, you're not distracted by looking at what somebody's shirt looks like or what somebody's hair looked like. You're just focused on what people are saying. And like you had like a newfound presence in a meeting and focus to be able to contribute and to listen. And also your skills as a computer programmer and to be able to parse data and do analysis on data so that you could have an advantage in very complex sales, like a long sales process, government contracts. Can you talk a little bit about how your blindness truly made you like a better executive and a better contributor to a corporation?
Sure. So I needed to program my technology, my screen reader, with various enterprise systems to make it work more effectively. And so if you think about the financial models that you use on a complex multi-billion-dollar engagement, I did the pricing of these deals. I did the financial modeling of these deals. A lot of times we would have anywhere from 100 to 600 models for a global deal. Global deals, you had to cover all the regions, so you had 120 models for a commercial outsourcing deal. If it's a global deal, you have that times the number of regions plus a global roll-up. Imagine managing that, not being able to see. I needed to make sure that my technology linked into the Excel modeling architecture. So I built this bridge between my technology and Microsoft Excel. It's using what's called the document object model. It's basically a way for them to talk to one another. And so I became very familiar with Excel's back-end libraries for code. And as a result of that, I started figuring out that, hey, I could write some code in Visual Basic that automates a lot of what we do every day. So instead of us spending time manually adjusting these financial models, I could have a sheet, drop some inputs in that sheet, run a macro, run off and get a cup of coffee and come back, and it would have a lot of that done automatically. So I did that to automate a lot of what we were doing on our global teams to save hours at the back end of a long sales cycle when it's very precious when you're trying to run through deal reviews and get through management meetings and get things submitted to the customer. But then there are other things where we're trying to research data on a deal that we're working on. And in the federal space, sometimes we'd be going after a large deal and we would need to research thousands of pages of documents and congressional appropriations or Freedom of Information Act documents. A lot of my sighted peers would be just scouring these pages manually. Well, I built a search algorithm that would convert it to text and then look for certain keywords and spit out a summary report for me. So while everybody else was scanning thousands of pages over the course of a week or two, I would fire off my search algorithm, go get a cup of coffee, and come back, and in 10 minutes I'd have a summary report so I could click down and see what do I need to know about this funding to understand how our strategy needs to be adjusted. And so all these different tools that I used and my understanding of technology made it imperative that I understand the business of information technology. Because I was in consulting, because I wrote code, because I was in commercial outsourcing, my dependence on technology myself made it easier for me to understand the business of information technology. So when you're pricing a $1 billion deal or a $20 billion deal, if you don't understand the business of information technology, you could really put your company in harm's way. But combining the business of information technology with the current market for technology and the strategy and the customer's willingness to pay and all these trends in the marketplace gave me this bird's eye view. I know it's ironic, a blind guy with a bird's eye view of how all these things come together. So how does the market price coalesce with the pricing strategy coalesce with the competitive environment that we're facing and what our competitors are likely to do? How does that coalesce with the technical requirements and the service level agreements and all the interdependencies of business service delivery? I was able to manage all of that because I had a strong foundation from a technical standpoint and a market standpoint. But a lot of that was given to me. A lot of those tools were reinforced from my eye condition, which compelled me to be a better technologist.
And was that your secret weapon? I mean, is that one of the key factors in why you were so successful, why you have been so successful in your job?
I think that was it. I'm not advocating people go out and get blind to be successful at their job. but if I'm being real, it did offer me some advantages. And I think all of our disadvantages can offer us advantages. We just have to figure out the right context to exercise those disadvantages. I'm probably not the best airline pilot, right? But there are certain things that my blindness allows me to do more effectively. So if I put myself in those contexts, in those situations, then I can excel more easily.
Chad, at this point, you've really mastered, I think, telling yourself the right stories, motivating yourself, really not being fearful of reaching for new heights. Just to let everybody know, Chad goes downhill skiing on black diamond runs as a blind person. So he walks the walk. He gets out of his comfort zone. How do you deal with, people who underestimate you? Because I know that when you first were trying to interview for jobs, there were many people in HR who didn't give you a fair chance. I would suspect even when you're in a job, people view you and say, who is this blind guy? What's he doing? And then all of a sudden you pull out your data and like complex pricing strategies and contracts, and how to price a deal and be able to make up for aggressive pricing like somewhere else. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with what other people think?
Well, I think a lot of what I did throughout my career, and I'm not there now. I've moved beyond this now, but early in my career, I used it as fuel. So I would I wanted to hear the doubts. I wanted people to doubt me and I wanted them to tell me, because that provided fuel for me. It gave me the energy that I needed to go off and do what I needed to do. Because what I've done, learning how to engineer software just to be able to do my job without being able to see my computer screen, that's not for the faint of heart. It takes dedication. I was a pre-med major who ended up as a business major, and next thing I know, I'm writing code to engineer software. So that wasn't for the faint of heart. So I needed a little extra motivation. So I think when people doubt me, I think it's great, actually. It makes it easier for me to justify the level of effort that I need to pour into something. Now, I'm at a little bit different place in my career, and I still listen to that, and it still motivates me, but it doesn't bother me as much as it used to, right? Maybe it bothered me a little bit more when I was younger and not as comfortable with my situation and not as mature. But certainly, again, there are situations out there, if you can figure out how to take advantage of them, people doubting you can be a big advantage if you use it in the right way.
As a guy who's willing to ski downhill without his sight, do you ever fear what the possibilities could be?
Yeah, of course. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is doing something despite the presence of fear. It's stepping through the fear. We all face fears. If you don't face fears, then you probably don't have a central nervous system, right? It keeps us alive. But the difference between, I guess, how I think about fear and maybe the way that other people think about fear, we need a sense of fear to help keep us grounded in life. But we will all, at some point in our lives, we will all die. That's just the bottom line. And if we're so fortunate to make it into our golden years, and we look back on our lives, what regrets can we live with? Is it the regret of, I don't know what I could have done because I didn't have the courage to try? How wonderful could my life have been if only I had had that conviction, that confidence, and that courage to follow through? Is that a regret? people can live with. I cannot live with that regret. I personally can live with the regret of, hey, I tried everything I wanted to do. I tried downhill skiing. I separated my shoulder. Maybe I broke my leg, whatever the case may be. But I lived my life how I wanted to live it. Not everything went my way. That's life. But you know what? More things went my way than did not. And you know what? The most important thing of all, I know that I reached my full potential. I know that I lived my best life. It may not have been a perfect life. None of us are going to have that. But it was my best life. I know where my boundaries are because I pushed and I pushed. And I found those boundaries. And that's great. If you're not failing from time to time, then you're not aiming high enough.
Amen. Chad, I like to ask all the Inspired Money guests, how do you define success?
How do I define success? I define success as doing what I want to do, what is fulfilling for me, what is a passion of mine, what I have a talent for doing, and what I can also monetize. So if I can combine my talents, my passion, and my profession in a way that allows me to provide for my family and send my kids to school and, you know, live a good quality life, doing what I love to do and giving back to others and helping in some way, I've hit the lottery. It's not about money at that point. Money, I think, it's helpful to have, but there are diminishing returns with money if you're not doing what you want. You could take somebody who has all the money in the world, and if they're not doing what they want to do day in and day out, eventually they're going to be miserable. So it's figuring out, how can I combine this necessity for money? We all need it, and we all want more of it, and that's normal, that's natural. But how do I combine that with doing what is impactful for me emotionally, what's fulfilling and what's purpose-driven, and giving back to other people and doing something that I have a talent? If I can get the intersection of all those things, that's jackpot right there.
I like that trifecta: talent, purpose, and monetization.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Chad. Thanks for sharing your inspiring story with us. The ability to turn a weakness into a strength, the ability to tell ourselves the right stories, and the power behind that. Can you tell the Inspired Money listener and viewer where to find out more about you and where to get your book?
Sure. So my book is on all the major retail outlets. It's at Amazon. It's at Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, Bookshop, Books A Million, any fine retailer where books are sold. We are also, you can go to my website. There's a link there which has all of those links. My website is chadefoster.com. There are videos there. There's a book page there. There's all my social media there. I'm at Find Chad E. Foster for Facebook and Instagram, and then Chad E. Foster for Twitter, and I'm on LinkedIn and others. All that information's on my website. Again, that's chadefoster.com.
I'll put that all in the show notes, and Chad is available for speaking, and everyone can see that he's got great stories to tell and a powerful message to share. So thank you, Chad.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
So what was your favorite Inspired Money moment? I hope that Chad inspired you as much as he inspired me. My big takeaway is the power of controlling the stories that you tell yourself in your mind. They can help you become who you're destined to be. Choose to tell yourself the right stories, the positive stories that will empower you. I also like the idea of living without regrets. One of the scariest things is lacking the courage, confidence, and conviction to follow your own path to greatness. I hope that Chad's story inspires you to push yourself to live your best life. If you had a different favorite Inspired Money moment, let me know by posting a comment below. And for watching to the end, I want to send you this Inspired Money sticker. Go to inspiredmoney.fm/Andy, send me your name and address, and I'll put this in the mail for you. Thank you so much for joining me on this mission. Have an inspired week and do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens.